Good afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to the November edition of our Cornerstone webinars. My name is Justin Goddard, and I serve as the Program Officer for National Leadership and Education here at Community Progress. Cornerstone is our monthly webinar series that equips participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's Cornerstone, we are joined by Liz Kozub, Rachel Ng, and Linda Steele. Liz Kozub serves as the Associate Director of National Leadership and Education here at Community Progress. In this role, she manages our trainings programming, our resident engagement programs, and our work on creative placemaking. Prior to joining Community Progress, Liz served as the Assistant Director for the Turtle Creek Valley Council of Governments, a multi-municipal agency focused on intergovernmental cooperation and shared services in the Mon Valley of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Rachel Ng is trained in urban and regional planning and is interested in thinking about how people use arts and culture to achieve a variety of community development goals. She is currently the Conductor of Curiosity at Metris Arts Consulting, a firm that helps communities improve and measure cultural vitality. She will hold this position until the end of 2019, and then will explore other opportunities in the realm of arts research, evaluation, and planning. Finally, Linda Steele is the founder and CEO of Art Up, an arts organization aimed at driving social change, breaking down barriers in the creative economy, and launching creative entrepreneurs in Memphis, Tennessee. Before turning it over to our presenters, I want to mention that we will allow time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your browser and send it to both the webinar host and all panelists. Also, if you have a specific question for one of today's presenters, please refer to them by name in your question. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to message the Community Progress host or send an email to Justin Goddard at jgoddard@communityprogress.net. And with that, I turn it over to our presenters.
Great, thank you, Justin. And thank you all for joining us today on this webinar. As Justin mentioned, my name is Liz Kozub, and I am the Associate Director of National Leadership and Education for the Center for Community Progress. And I'm really excited to be joined today by my two esteemed panelists, Rachel and Linda. So to give a little bit of background on how this group of panelists came to be, Rachel and I, along with our colleagues at the Center for Community Progress and Metris Arts Consulting, have been working on a project over the past year that culminated in the report Trends in Creative Placemaking on Problem Properties, which we will go into in greater detail through the course of this presentation. But as a part of that process, we conducted several interviews for case studies in that report, and Orange Mound Gallery in Memphis, Tennessee was one of those case studies. Linda will talk a bit about the gallery, which we see is a wonderful example of addressing a vacant property in a way that uses arts and culture, and not only honors the history of a community, but also ensures that neighbors have access to wealth building opportunities. So we're happy to have her on the presentation as well. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to run through the agenda that you see listed on the screen and certainly allow time for question and answers at the end. But before we get into the details of our report, I just want to mention a little bit about Community Progress for those folks that might be new to this webinar series. We are a national nonprofit organization that works with communities across the country to address the challenges of vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties. Throughout the course of this presentation, I might condense that to problem properties and communities. And we understand that there are ineffective, inefficient, and inequitable policies that keep properties and communities stuck in decline. In order to effect meaningful change and bring vibrancy back to communities, those policies and processes need to be addressed in a comprehensive way, and equity needs to be at the forefront of decision making. Our work spans from technical services, education, training, policy, and research. purpose of this webinar is to talk about the findings in our newly released publication, Trends in Creative Placemaking on Problem Properties. It was released just last month while many of you were at our Reclaiming Vacant Properties conference in Atlanta. So we're happy to have an opportunity to dig into some of the details with you today. We know that addressing problem properties can be incredibly complex. Intentional disinvestment in communities, deteriorated property conditions, and weak markets create a whole host of issues for communities. And we know that there's no singular tool to address all the vacant properties that many communities are struggling with. Over the last 3 years, Community Progress has been looking towards creative placemaking as one of those tools that can address problem properties, and one that has shown success in integrating community voices into revitalization efforts. So that's why we're excited about creative placemaking in communities. Our work also suggests that creative placemaking taking place on problem properties presents a unique set of challenges, given there's issues with uncooperative owners, not knowing owners, property conditions can be in pretty rough states. But our work also suggests that creative placemaking on these problem properties also presents potentially unique opportunities for positive impacts in communities. You can download the report for free on our website, communityprogress.net, under the Publication tab, so feel free to do that as we're walking through this presentation. So why, as an organization, did we turn to a national survey to get a better understanding of creative placemaking? And it really starts with the work that we conducted back in 2018. We conducted 2 learning exchanges and 2 site visits in communities to explore how creative placemaking was being used as a revitalization tool to address vacant properties. That information is outlined in the report, Creative Placemaking on Vacant Properties, Lessons Learned in 4 Cities. Those 4 cities were Kalamazoo, Michigan, Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, Macon, Georgia, and Newburgh, New York. There were a number of themes that emerged from that report and the peer exchanges that took place. I won't go into a lot of details on what those items were. I encourage you to take a look at that report. But generally speaking, themes that came from work in those 4 cities were the importance of partnerships in implementing successful projects, and really partners that come from a variety of backgrounds, and making sure everybody's on the same page, which can be complicated. The communities were also using tactics to generate momentum for their work, so really using some short-term gains and successes to really set up some long-term changes in communities, and things like pop-up events and other short-term events to really get folks excited. Engagement of residents and other stakeholders is a key and really fundamental to creative placemaking. Many of the cities were using tactics for doing this as well, some of which included using children as a way to engage other folks within the community. We also learned through that work that it's incredibly important to identify the regulatory barriers, especially because there are many potentially present with vacant properties, and identifying those people that can help overcome those barriers. And lastly, the need to be creative in terms of funding for projects, because this work can be expensive. And we learned a lot from those peer exchanges in the 4 cities, but we wanted to zoom out a bit. We wanted to have an understanding of if these themes identified hold true to a broad swath of communities across the country. Do other communities engage in similar tactics for getting folks on board and involved in the process? Do other communities have similar challenges? What are community goals at a more aggregate level for engaging in creative placemaking? Why are communities doing this work? And how is it integrated with other revitalization strategies, and who's leading those efforts? Lastly, we wanted to learn more about the regulatory challenges associated with these properties and how communities were overcoming them. As an organization, we wanted to have a better understanding of these trends in creative placemaking across the country and be able to share those trends with our network, which is the motivation behind this report and the national survey upon which it's based. So in January of this year, we released a national survey to find answers to those questions, and I'm sure many folks on the call had responded to that survey, so thank you for those that did. We received 170 responses from 31 states, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. The majority of the respondents worked in urban areas. We have a pretty good mix of backgrounds in terms of where people are coming from and approaching the work of creative placemaking. So about a third were from local organizations that were not art specifics, but maybe some community development organizations that focus on a local geography. About 20% were community arts-based organizations, 15% worked for local government, and there were a handful of others that worked for entities all across the cities in which they worked. So before I turn it over to Rachel to talk about the survey results, I want to just touch base about what we mean by creative placemaking. There are 3 essential elements of creative placemaking, and this really comes from that report that we released in 2018. First, projects are place-based. Much as the title suggests, creative placemaking practitioners root their work in a specific place and serve the people and the context of that place. So this includes projects reflect the physical, social, and economic priorities of the community. Secondly, projects are integrated with other strategies. So creative placemaking is one tool that can be used in a concert of other tools as part of a revitalization strategy, as I mentioned earlier. So this can include housing preservation and development, economic development, resident serving programs. It can include code enforcement and demolition, and other tools that communities are using to revitalize vacant properties in their neighborhoods. And lastly, the process is community-centered. So community-centered efforts are those created by and for the community. These efforts include engaging residents and business owners to brainstorm what a place can and should be, what it once was, how it should remain, and really having the voices and the perspectives and the desires of the community at the forefront. What we found through this survey is that creative placemaking takes on different definitions and meaning for different people. So we're certainly not the first organization to have come across this issue. However, throughout our analysis, we wanted to be sure we were being true to our commitment and highlighting projects that really centered community. And obviously, this can be difficult when you're reviewing surveys and having kind of informal interviews and conversations with folks. But we challenged ourselves and really encouraged others to ask questions about how the community was involved in these projects, including how and when residents were involved, who is viewed as the owner of the projects and the owner of the process, and do residents have the power to make decisions related to the work that goes on. So we received a number of very cool examples of what we would categorize as creative reuse of vacant and abandoned properties. So repurposing lots, converting warehouses space into singular uses, and similar projects clearly have a lot of value to community. They can beautify spaces, they can reduce crime in a neighborhood, they can bring hope and inspiration to others to engage in this type of work. However, it's really important that community members and residents are a part of that process and also leading decisions. So those are the projects that we highlighted through the course of this report. So with that, I will turn it over to Rachel to talk about the results.
Great. Thank you, Liz, and thanks for having me on this webinar, and I'm excited to be here with all of you today to share some key findings from the survey. And we'll just cover a few today, and I encourage you to download the report so you can read all about all of the survey findings and some pretty cool case studies as well. So one of the questions that we asked in this survey is, why are communities using arts and culture to activate problem properties? And so you'll see in this graph here that And people could choose multiple reasons. That's why this graph adds up to more than 100. But the most popular answer was to activate underutilized vacant space. And then the third most common answer was to reduce blight. So we really understood that communities engage in creative placemaking projects to turn problem property into neighborhood assets. And by blighted properties, we meant properties that have fallen into disrepair, are unsafe, and unsightly. So another common goal of this work was to build community among residents, and then also this fourth most common, empower residents to shape their neighborhood. So this is really kind of the community building goals of this work. So we were encouraged that those were also popular answers. Almost 2/3, 61% of respondents said that they do this work to support a larger neighborhood revitalization vision. And so survey respondents wrote about projects that act as demonstrations to test ideas and show what's possible. And this work of neighborhood revitalization usually takes a lot of time and sustained energy. So when communities could celebrate small wins, that can help bring people on board and signal momentum. We were also interested in some of the nuts and bolts of creative placemaking projects. So we asked, what type of property did people use for their projects? And 43% used vacant lots without a structure. So we heard a lot about gardens, community gardens, and building parks, painting murals on vacant lots without structures. 28% said their project happened on vacant commercial structures, and we'll hear a really great example from Linda in a little bit about using a commercial structure to using arts and culture to activate vacant commercial structures. And then also a smaller percentage use vacant residential structures and then neighborhood parks. We were interested in the cost of these creative placemaking projects. And we found that projects really vary widely in terms of complexity and cost. So for example, one community that filled out our survey created an artistic board-up program to cover broken windows of vacant houses with artistic images. And that program cost less than $5,000. Which was the smallest amount. Under $5,000 was kind of the smallest amount that we were looking at here. But then other projects, such as transforming entire buildings, cost more than $100,000. So often these buildings, despite the higher price tag, it reveals a level of efficiency and perhaps economies of scale. So these bigger projects can support a variety of compatible uses like art studios, a coffee shop, a performance venue, all under one roof. So survey respondents most commonly said that their project costs over $100,000, 43% said that. But then the next most common answer is under $5,000, which really shows that there's a range of costs for these projects. And so this difference in cost could also signal that for some projects, the focus is on maybe more low impact or temporary uses, while for others, the goal is to transform a vacant structure for long-term use. We also were interested in who is doing this work, especially who's leading creative placemaking on problem properties. And so survey respondents really affirmed some of the key themes that emerged in the first phase of this research that Liz mentioned in 2018, that partnerships are really key to making these projects happen. And often those partnerships are of necessity. So the person with the idea of a project could be different from the person who owns the property, and that's maybe different from the person who funds the project. And then you have an artist, too, who's collaborating on this project, and maybe they don't have the most deep relationship to the community, and so they need to partner with an organization that's very community-based to ensure trust. So really there are usually a lot of players for these projects. And we found here that 55% of the respondents said that community-based nonprofits, which are not art-specific, are leading this work, followed closely by arts and culture nonprofits, where 52% of respondents said that those were leading the work. And respondents could choose more than one type of organization or person leading this work. Other leaders are block clubs, informal community groups, the government are leading some projects, independent artists, private sector, and then a smaller amount of respondents noted that colleges and universities and land banks were leading this work. So we wanted to give a brief example of how partnerships have really made these projects possible. And so this is the Wish Gallery. It's an example of a community development organization that participated in a creative placemaking project with the Hinge Collective, which is a social design firm. And this project is in Philadelphia, and the Hinge Collective worked with students to perform outreach and develop initial proposals for a small vacant lot in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. And the Hinge Collective was able to gain the trust of residents as well as a large population of people who are unhoused to identify avenues for healing. And Hinge Collective was able to do that because of their partnership with the New Kensington CDC. So in the summer of 2018, the Hinge Collective attended community events with a prototype of a community message board constructed by students to ask community members to share their memories and wishes for their home. And these images here are kind of what happened after asking community members that question. So we were also interested in what phases of the projects are residents involved in. And so the previous slide that I talked about goals of creative placemaking, building community and empowering residents were two leading reasons why communities do this creative placemaking work on problem properties. And so it's not too surprising that many projects engage residents throughout the project, from the design, the 62% of the projects engaged residents in the design phase, to implementation. 75% said they engaged residents there, and then the most common residents said that they invited, survey respondents said they invited residents to events and used the space. 78% said that they involved residents in that way. So despite the high percentage of resident involvement in individual phases of the project, except for this fundraising phase where only about a third said they engaged residents, we looked at what percent of respondents engaged residents in all of these phases, and only 20% said that they engaged residents in all the phases. So in other words, there's some room for improvement in terms of involving residents in all phases of the work. And so this lack of resident involvement throughout the entire process could signal a blurring of this definition of creative reuse from creative placemaking that Liz mentioned at the top of the webinar. So I think this graph shows that projects are engaging residents in lots of different ways, and there's still room to think about how community is co-creating the project from the very beginning. One example that surfaced through the survey of community members involved in a variety of phases of a project is the Photo Voice project. And the Colorado Trust, which is a private health equity foundation in Colorado Springs, partnered with a grassroots community organization to offer this Photo Voice project. So kids in the neighborhood were given cameras and asked to snap photos of things they liked and things they wanted to change in their communities. So through this exercise, the kids identified a few places they wanted to make better, including a local basketball court. So the kids started asking, why can't we just make the changes? And then they got their parents involved, and a group of volunteers came together and renovated a basketball court in one weekend, and it cost less than $500. And Mia Ramirez from the Colorado Trust said that people were on a real high after doing this project, seeing how they can make these things happen in their neighborhood. So we also were interested in understanding what kind of challenges communities were facing doing this creative placemaking on problem property. And so the most common answer here was funding the projects, and 65% said that that was a challenge. And then smaller percentages noted these other challenges. And I think what is important to highlight here are some of the challenges that are around regulatory barriers. So gaining access to or ownership of property, liability and or insurance, housing, building, fire, other code compliance, zoning, and event permitting. So a good number of respondents said that they encountered those challenges, and we started thinking about the role of government in helping communities navigate these challenges. So returning a vacant property to productive use, creative or otherwise, is often far more complicated and technical than one would expect in terms of navigating these bureaucratic laws and policies that govern property. So if it's abandoned, government agencies are involved in finding the owner or transferring that property to public ownership. And even if the property is privately owned, government agencies are still involved in enforcing property maintenance and safety standards. So even in maybe what we might think is the most straightforward situations, stakeholders who are pursuing a creative placemaking project will run into bureaucratic processes like insurance and permitting and gaining access to property. And that's where we hope government is hopefully a partner in navigating these challenges. So through the survey, we really came to understand government support in two different ways. One is traditional support, so government helping communities who want to do this creative placemaking work navigate bureaucratic departments, walk through an event permitting process, or approving plans for a new project. So basically, government doing their job and helping folks navigate any challenges they might have. And then we also saw some examples of transformative partnerships. So government as thought partner, innovator, and policy changer. So we want to give an example of both of these approaches that we saw in the survey, and really want to challenge us all to think about how government can yes, provide this traditional support and move towards this more transformative partnership. So Tired a Lot Studios is an example of a way government has provided traditional support for this work. It's in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The Mount Vernon Park Neighborhood Association runs this Tired a Lot project and studio for neighborhood kids, and they're really involved in transforming vacant properties in their neighborhood. Kids worked with local architects to redesign a vacant lot, which you can see here. And before they, started building, they took the project to the Zoning Land Use Board to advocate for the needed zoning changes and special use permit that they needed. And they were even there when the board approved the request. Rena Bradley organizes the program, and she said her training in architecture really helped her know how to navigate city systems like zoning approval. An example of more transformative partnership is Paint the Town. The City of Oakland Department of Transportation piloted this Paint the Town program in 2017 to encourage community ownership of public space by facilitating this resident-designed, resident-organized mural projects on pavement. And so by launching this program, the Department of Transportation sought to minimize historical barriers to community participation in government programs. They developed a toolkit outlining guidelines and held application clinics for interested neighborhood and community groups. And to advance OCDOT's equity goals, the department wanted to ensure that this program was accessible to underserved communities and set a goal to approve projects on a 2-to-1 ratio, facilitating 2 projects in neighborhoods of medium and high disadvantaged communities for every project approved in a low disadvantaged community neighborhood. So OCDOT has not quite decided how to move this pilot forward, but Annie Ludbury, who is the Creative Community Development Manager at East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, hopes that this pilot turns into something more permanent that other communities could replicate. So those are some key findings from our survey, and I'm going to now turn it over to Linda, who will talk about the Orange Mound Gallery in Memphis.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? I just wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is Linda Steele, and I'm founder and CEO of ArtUp, and I'm based in Memphis, Tennessee. Just plowing right into the case study. This particular gallery is located in an area of Memphis called Orange Mound. It was actually founded in 1890 and has such a rich history. A little bit about Orange Mound. Today, 51% live under the poverty line, and the median income is $19,000. It wasn't always this way, but around the 80s, it started to go into decline. And there are a number of vacant properties, both storefronts and also land and homes. This particular project takes place right here, as you see, in a strip mall. And the space that we're talking about, the property, was actually a liquor store in the neighborhood for many years. And individuals told me that it would attract loitering and crime and those sorts of things. At the time, I was based at the Arts Council here in Memphis, and my specific role at the Arts Council was funding arts-based community engagement and revitalization projects. My job was to cultivate relationships with arts and culture organizations and residents of disinvested communities, and I was specifically looking for opportunities to create equitable partnerships among and between arts and culture organizations and residents of disinvested communities in Memphis, Tennessee. So the way this started was really community members came to me. Since it was my job to actually cultivate relationships, I had been doing that, and we built some trust, and community members came to me and they showed me this property that you see, and it was vacant, and they introduced me to the landlord of the strip mall. And what happened from there was we began a negotiation around taking over the space and occupying the space, and essentially was able to get 1 year free rent while we worked on this. I was able to be introduced. We can stop right here before we move forward. I was able to be introduced to an artist who had a background and in the Orange Mound neighborhood, and he physically transformed the space from a vacant space into what I call a purpose space, which provides a platform for artists and to show their work and sell their work, as well as a way for the community to make money. Individuals who lived in the neighborhood served as docents, and they opened the gallery, closed the gallery, also worked during exhibitions, and they made a living wage. They were paid $15 an hour. The artists were able to show and sell their work. This was a platform that many of them hadn't had, and then also this brought people from all over the city who never would have come to this area before to see this work. The space also served as a community meeting space, and where they had events that were totally free. So they had events, for example, they honored individuals from the neighborhood who had passed away through repasts in the neighborhood. They had community Thanksgiving meals and holiday meals for individuals who were with food security, who did not have any meals otherwise. They provided clothing, a shop for people to pick up winter clothing, boots, and bedding. So it was really a phenomenal way to partner. So we can begin next. I'll show you some photos of before and after, so you can see what the space looked like, typical of, you know, a storefront, and really somebody vacated and pretty much left it that way. This is the beginning of when our residents were just kind of using it before it was turned into an arts space. Just to show you what was happening. Here's our artist in residence looking at it and beginning the actual process of transforming the space. And he worked with individuals who lived in the neighborhood, and they were paid to help transform the space. Next slide. Continue on. So you can see it transforming. It was a lot of work to do this, and it was a community effort. Here we are as it's beginning to take shape, and what he's preparing for is actually a partnership between Rhodes College and the gallery. This is the art garden. Behind the gallery is a fascinating place, but it was filled with litter. And we saw it could be something more, but obviously the community came together and cleaned the space so it looked more like this afterward. And then this, on February 19th, 2016, this was the Art in Place Symposium. And we partnered with Rhodes College, and this was the exhibition featuring our artist in residence who provided his collection of recycled materials made into dresses, as well as some of his collection of art. And we had not only the community there, residents of Orange Mound, but we had faculty and staff of Rhodes College, some University of Memphis individuals, as well as several artists of all forms, visual artists, performing artists. Everyone was there. We have these cans. It was a way to display a project of one of the artists, residents who lived in the neighborhood. She was concerned with blight, so she turned the cans into really pieces of art so that people would want to throw their garbage into something that was essentially art as opposed to just a plain garbage can. The residents were very involved in the opening as well as everyday management of the gallery, and they still are, I should say. And just here's a photo so you can just see how the transformation from a liquor store into an art space. And just briefly, the lessons learned from this experience is, one, build trust. This was a community-centered approach. Partnerships, very important. All stakeholders were involved. I think it was really key that I was a grant maker and funder, and I think anyone on the line who is involved in grant making should think through this. It was very empowering and really speaks to equity in grant making. The other thing that we provided here is professional development specifically for the residents so that they could learn how arts and culture can be integrated into the revitalization of their communities and that they could be empowered to do so. So while this was happening, they were also taking classes and they were fellows, and they were going out to cities such as Chicago to see the work of the Astor Gates and the Rebuild Foundation so that they could learn how to apply all of these things in their own neighborhood. There was a transfer of a partnership to leadership. So the individuals who live in the community are actually leaders of this. They make all the decisions. And also a business model. It's more than a project. Today we are working through what that business model is so that they can aim for sustainability. And in February of 2020, it will really be 5 years. So this has been phenomenal. They've had performing arts, classical music, they've had visual arts, they've had hip hop, they've had all sorts of performances and exhibitions here. And just so everyone knows, it's called Orange Mound Gallery, but we call it for short OMG, because once you hear the story, you really say, OMG, oh my gosh. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Linda, and thanks, Rachel. So hearing the the results of the survey and a practical and really inspiring project of creative placemaking, and one that really centers around equity in a neighborhood and involving the residents in that neighborhood in the decision making, but also in the ability to showcase their work and their talents, was something that I really enjoyed reading and the responses that we received. So thanks, Linda, and thank you to everybody who did submit responses for the survey. So with that, we are going to take a few questions, and I do see that a number have come in. So I'm going to take just a moment to take a look at these, but while I'm doing that, feel free to submit your questions in the question and answer box. So I have one question about were private businesses involved in the creative placemaking efforts? And I can point to two examples from our recent work and the survey responses that do involve private businesses. So first, one of the case studies that's in the report is from a group called Beyond Walls in Lynn, Massachusetts, and they had undertaken a pretty huge mural festival to really transform the way that the city of Lynn looks for folks that maybe just be passing by because it is on a rail line to the city of Boston. And so they had worked with a lot of business owners and property owners in that community to do a number of really large-scale murals within the downtown Lynn area. They also engaged with unions in the community, so the Painters Union, to help prime the canvases, which are the buildings for those murals, and helping to train some of the artists on how to use the equipment for those spaces, and also engaged Phipps Electrical and Light Company to provide resources and lighting resources to light up an underpass within their community that was deemed as unsafe by community members. Another example came from our first report in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the Kalamazoo Land Bank did a very cool project called the Fair Games, and they had a competition for local would-be restaurant entrepreneurs to develop their culinary and business skills within themselves, and also an opportunity for the community to vote on which restaurant they would like to occupy a space that was owned by the land bank. So those are two examples of case studies that you could read about in our report in which private businesses were involved. And Linda or Rachel, if you have any examples that you want to share, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, this is Rachel. Those are two great examples, Liz, that you mentioned. And I think that private businesses can really play a variety of roles, from kind of minimal to, maybe a business lets an artist use, a vacant property for a short time, to, very significant involvement. So there's a range of involvement, I would say, that private businesses could take.
I agree. I would just consider the landlord of the strip mall. Essentially, he was a partner in a law firm, and he's also real estate development. So I would include him as a private business. And for example, the first year when we worked together, he really didn't charge any rent, and then really wrote that off that first year as a charitable deduction. So there are great partnerships out there. Thanks.
Linda, I have a question for you. One of the participants said, I'm interested in learning more about how to achieve community-owned properties. Is OMG Community Gallery still privately owned, and do you have plans to transition it to community-owned?
It is, actually, it's still a great partnership. The previous owner sold it, but then he sold it letting them know that he was that this was a place that really helped turn around the strip mall. So right now that's what's going on, but at the same time they have been empowered by this process, and they are now, they've taken possession of another building down the street from the gallery outside of the strip mall, and they actually own it. And so there's a chance that the entire operation of the gallery can just move down the street to this building that they've owned. And now they've actually worked with the city government to acquire that building.
Great. So there is a question on, do we have any examples of a legal service provider supporting creative placemaking work? And I don't think that we received any examples of legal service providers or attorneys supporting this work or mentoring folks that are doing this work. But what we have learned and also recognized is that community groups and artists and other folks that may be leading this work may not have the correct knowledge and tools to really work through some of the regulatory challenges that exist. One thing that we heard from a group of folks that we had convened was kind of the issue around zoning. And for folks that have an understanding of zoning, it's not necessarily a huge barrier because they can work with some of the elected officials and administrative staff to figure out some ways to kind of work within zoning or change zoning. But for some resident groups or others that might not have that knowledge, it's kind of seen as this huge barrier that can't possibly be overcome. So we certainly can point to places where legal services certainly would help negotiate those conversations and relationships. I just don't have an example of one that has worked based off of the survey results, but am certainly interested in hearing more if folks have done that work from a legal service standpoint. And there are some questions about kind of the bureaucratic barriers and the role that government plays in this work. And we also understand. We also understand.
I just wanted to say we actually use.
Go ahead, Linda.
We actually used an attorney. We worked with an attorney around the lease and making sure that it was a good lease and agreement with the landlord. So an attorney was really a great partner in the work that we did here.
Oh, great. That's wonderful. Yeah, and so, and discussing kind of the role of these, the role of local government and regulations that exist are certainly there for a reason. And we certainly don't want to suggest that local governments are standing in the way of this work. And in many cases, they are supporting it and leading this work. And just having conversations around kind of why specific code requirements are needed and maybe some ways that and different avenues that group can take to make sure that they meet the code and do it in a way that local government officials are comfortable with approving. And from what we've heard a lot is it really is about partnerships, and it's about trust and being able to access people within city governments and local governments that are making and leading those decisions and getting everybody kind of at the table and an understanding of what needs to be done and what the community's priorities are as well.
Could I add something quickly, Liz? This is
Please.
Rachel. Yeah, I think this relationship piece and trust piece is really important, and often the creative placemaking practitioners have similar goals to the city around like community development and revitalization, and sometimes they're speaking different languages, and I mean, not literally, but they just don't understand each other. Artists can think that the city is like really bureaucratic and not understand that angle, and then government, you know, maybe doesn't understand the artist. And so building those relationships and understanding each other can only help as, you know, to get projects going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So there's a question about pop-up events in communities and if they're created over a theme and what kind of challenges are faced with pop-up events. There is one that is highlighted in the report where they did a pop-up beach day that was in a municipal parking lot. This came from Sullivan County, New York. As a way to get kids involved and kind of brought to a space, and also a meeting point for parents to talk about some larger revitalization goals. And certainly pop-ups are being used by organizations across the country as a fun event that can get folks to a specific place and generate some excitement around work. And really what we've seen is those pop-up events serve as those kind of short-term wins to hopefully lead to some longer projects and longer and more sustainable programs in the future. So I'm going to take one more question. Just had a lot come in the last 20 seconds. So give me just one moment. So we have a couple of questions related to gentrification and kind of fears of displacing current residents in a neighborhood, and kind of how can creative placemaking work in that. We've certainly heard and recognized those fears as well, that when communities start to see kind of art popping up and certainly places that are vibrant and they may not have been involved in those projects could potentially signal that gentrification is coming and that more investment is coming. I don't have an answer to that and how to improve stop that from happening and improve the trust of communities. But that's really why it's incredibly important to engage the community throughout the process, and why we've tried to distinguish the difference between creative reuse, which may cause more fear in existing community members if they're not involved in the process and aware of decisions that are happening, versus creative placemaking, which should really be centered on community voices and the desires of the neighborhood. I don't know if Linda or Rachel, you wanted to add anything else to that.
Yeah, I think that's really great, that difference between creative reuse and creative placemaking. As I said, our particular effort, OMG, was really about the community actually came to me. They identified this issue. They identified the space. They were looking for a partner to help figure out what to do. And so it really just added, this was an eyesore in a storefront that actually had several vacant spaces. And today, someone next door, now it's extended to another creative group is occupying the space next door. We have a mural around the corner. So it's really creating more of a creative corridor in the neighborhood.
Great, thank you. So we are at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap this up, but I just want to thank you all again for being a part of this webinar. Our contact information is listed on the screen here, and the presentation will be sent out shortly, so you'll have access to us in the future. So thank you again.
All right, and I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you to everybody who joined us today. Please visit our website for more information on this and other webinars, and have a great afternoon. This will be the last webinar for 2019, but we will see you in 2020.
Thanks, bye.